All right, good morning. Welcome to the Corning Museum of Glass here at the museum and at home. We have an artist, Eric Goldschmidt, and he's going to be making one of his figures for you this morning, and it's going to be a very exciting demo, so let's get started.
Alrighty, thank you, Catherine. So welcome everyone here at the museum, welcome World Wide Web. So I'll be using a process known as flameworking to make a figure similar to what you see on the table here. So we'll get this thing lit. So I'll be working off of a torch that runs on propane and oxygen. And when I crank it up as high as it can go, it actually drives the temperature of the flame up around 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, one thing I have learned in these days of COVID and wearing masks here is if you warm up your glasses, they don't fog up. So a pretty handy little maneuver there. So let's dive in. The first step is to prepare some of the colored glass that I want to use for this. So I'll be using a white glass that is sort of dilute. It's made over in China, and it is really ideal for some of the effect that I'm after with some of these figures. It sort of works out as a semi-translucent white by the time it's all said and done here. So I need some rods that are bigger than what I've got in my hand here. When I first ordered this colored glass, it comes in a form that's about 7 or 8 millimeters thick. But for the scale of these figures, I really need something a bit thicker. So I'm going to take the colored glass and stripe it onto a rod of clear glass, a much thicker rod. So that will work to give me the sort of scale I need for the colored glass. And it also helps to dilute the white, so I get that more sort of semi-translucent effect. So I did warm up that thick rod of clear glass in an annealing oven that I have off to my left side here. And I'll be working in and out of that oven as we go along through the process. With a really thick rod of glass like this, if you don't warm it evenly enough, it is very prone to cracking. So it's really helpful to warm it up in the oven, and then I know I can just really jump right into this 4,000 degree flame, and I'm not going to have any issues with that glass cracking. So just laying some stripes of the white glass down the sides of the clear. And now typically when I try to lay colored glass over clear, I would cover the entire piece of clear with color. For this particular process and this sort of color effect that I'm after, I actually do leave a little gap between each line. And that will further dilute the color effect that I'm after, which I really sort of like the sort of an ethereal effect of having a semi-translucent white. Almost looks like an opaline, but I have a little more control over it. And as I'm laying the stripes of colored glass down on the clear, you'll notice I'm focusing most of the flame on the colored glass, just sort of splashing a little bit of the flame on the clear to keep a warm path as I lay the colored glass on there. Now, to create colored glass, different metal oxides and different elements from the Earth's crust are melted in with the ingredients for clear glass. And at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, there is a chemical reaction that will take place, and that will create colored glass for us. I'm not absolutely certain what the colorant is for this particular white, but oftentimes tin oxide would be used to create a white glass like this, or potentially titanium oxide. So it's probably one of those two. Just going to add one more stripe of the white glass in here, fill in this last gap a bit. So as I lay the stripes on the surface here, they do stick to the clear glass, but they're not permanently fused to the clear. It's going to take a little more heat to make that happen. So now that those stripes are on there, I'm going to take some time and really get them fused in. And I'm going to use this section of colored glass for the core of the body. So this will be sort of the hip area, the butt, and also the upper torso. And these figures are something that's fairly new for me. I've been working on the torch for over 24 years, and I have been making figurative work for a large portion of that time. But when you first start off working with figurative work, you're really sort of chasing that perfect human form and trying to really get your proportions right, get all those sort of human details as accurate as possible. But as tends to happen for me, I get a little bit bored with the normal stuff, and I want to kind of mix it up and find my own way with things and sort of add my own voice to things. And so I started making some stylized figures maybe about 15 years ago. And those I've really enjoyed those, but now over the last year or so, I've sort of had some other thoughts of different styles of figures in mind. And the way my process for developing new work tends to flow is I do get a spark of an idea. It could come from just about anywhere. Oftentimes it may be travel related. It might be something I'm reading about. It might be world events. And so I'll sort of toss that idea around in my head for a bit, and eventually I'll start to draw it out. I'll get the sketchbook out, get the pencils out, and do some drawing. But I really don't draw particularly well. It is something I certainly continue to work at, but it's not something that comes too naturally for me to work in 2 dimensions. I'm much better in 3 dimensions. So when I'm sort of working out a new design, I'll draw it a few times. I'll leave a bunch of notes next to the sketch as well to try to really hash out that new idea as thoroughly as possible on paper. But then I move pretty quickly to trying to model that new object in clear glass and sort of feel out the object in 3 dimensions. And eventually, as I start to like what I'm accomplishing with clear glass, I'll move to using some colored glass, do some different color tests and see how different things look. And then eventually I'll get to the point where I'm really making the finished objects that I'd be willing to show or exhibit. And so we're sort of just arrived at that point with these figures. I've been really enjoying these in transparent colors, and also this sort of semi-translucent with the white, I think is a nice way to represent these. So that is what we're shooting for here. So just fusing in all the stripes of white glass, I'm sort of working my way down the rod here. And once I get these all fused in, I'll start to really set up the shape for the butt and hip area and the upper body, the upper torso. From there, I'll work on the lower body. I'll work on the legs, get the feet made, get the piece attached to sort of a little bridge like what you see on the figures around me, how the feet are connected to some clear glass as a bridge to keep them connected. And once I'm to that point, then I can start to work the upper body as well. So just getting this all fused in here. So I've been working with glass, as I mentioned, for 24 years. And I actually learned most of my foundation taking classes here at the museum. Right across our back parking lot behind me, we have a public access teaching facility, the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass. And we actually bring in artists from all around the world to teach their specialties here. So it really is a great place to learn this sort of thing. And we typically say it takes anywhere from about 4 to 6 years just to start becoming proficient as a glassmaker. Now, there's a whole lot of feel involved with this stuff. So really, no matter how well it might be explained to you, it takes thousands of hours of really having your hands on the material to really dial in a proper feel for the material itself, to get a good feel for the torch and all the possible settings of the torch, all the hand tools, the different processes we use. So it does take time. And as we discussed a few minutes ago, there's a lot of things that break in your educational process, a lot of disappointments here and there, but also a lot of little victories. So it definitely takes some patience and perseverance with this stuff. All right, so I've got the color all fused in. Now I want to set up the shape a little bit better here. So towards my left side of this form, that is where the butt and the hips are going to come from. And the right side is going to be that upper torso area. So we're going to set up almost like an awkward peanut shape here. So some folks out there probably pretty familiar with my work, and a lot of the things that I have tended to show on the internet, or especially live stream related things, tend to work with hollows and do a lot of goblet work, especially sort of Venetian style goblet work, but I really enjoy the figurative stuff as well. Gives me an opportunity to really show some expression. So just getting my shape all set up here, and I sort of set this up as a very compact form initially. I'll set up some of the details for the chest and the head, the chest and the back. And then I'm going to stretch it out so I get these real elongated, sort of sinuous forms here. I'm not entirely sure where these forms sort of get into my head. There definitely are a number of influences from different artists. And I also, as I've been making them, I've really been enjoying how expressive they can be, since they are so long and stretched out, and there really isn't all that much detail to them. I find that it almost makes them more expressive. People pay a little more attention to the postures rather than just individual sculpted details. We have a question from the internet here. The internet wants to know why I'm not wearing gloves. I am not wearing gloves because A, at the moment, I don't need to, and B, I really need my dexterity, and gloves would really inhibit that. Now, I will pop on a glove a little bit later in the process. There will be a time when my hand starts to heat up a little bit, and also my hand might sweat a little, so I'll need a better grip. So I do have a Kevlar glove next to me. I'll use that once I need to. But for now, you see how much I'm turning the glass, and I really need to do that very precisely. So I need every bit of my dexterity that I can muster. And since glass doesn't conduct the heat, it's simply not going to bring it over to my hand. And as long as I keep my hand out of the flame and don't grab the molten glass, we should be just fine that way. And people always wonder if us glass workers ever do get burned when we do this stuff. And yeah, you get some little things here and there, you certainly do. But it's very rarely the flame or the molten glass that gets you. You're too focused on those things. What is a lot more common is you use a metal tool to do some shaping, and you set it back on your bench or reach across it for something else, and maybe that metal tool tags you, but that's generally about as bad as it tends to get. So I'm going to set up the upper body here, carving in a line for the spine, stretching the material out. I'm also sort of flattening the upper chest but leaving the belly area rounded. So that's kind of the beginning of the form there. And now I do want to get a handle up around where the neck will emerge from. So once I get the handle on, I'm going to reheat that bit of upper torso material so I can stretch it out and really get that sort of elongated, stretched out form going. I want to make sure this is a good hot seal. I'm going to be supporting the whole body and the legs off of this handle here, so it's got to be attached well. So these are fairly sizable figures. They're all solid all the way through. I'm using just solid rods. So I have to be considerate of the fact that they are pretty big. There's some weight to them. I want to make sure that the handles are sturdy enough to really hold the glass and hold the forms. And I also, when I make smaller figures, things happen faster. The glass, if I'm using thinner rods of glass, it heats up faster. It also cools and stiffens faster. But as I work on a larger scale with thicker material, I really have to keep in mind that it's going to hold heat longer, stay softer longer once I do manage to heat it up. It's also going to take longer to drive the heat in there and get the glass softened for some of the shaping I want to do. So there are definitely some different considerations when working on a larger scale versus smaller scale. You really, on the larger scale, you have to sort of slow yourself down a bit. And also, it's really helpful to keep the glass hot and work it so it's staying and keeping a core heat in there. And that's why I do like starting these from warm prep. So rather than preparing the colored glass before I even start a demo like this, for this particular part of this piece, I do like to add the stripes onto the clear and then work straight off of that immediately. That way there's heat all the way through the piece, and it's really ready to go and ready to be formed. All right, so I've stretched out that upper torso area. I'm going to remove the rod that I'm using as a handle in my left hand. Get that off of the bottom area. I want to make sure I get all of the clear glass out of the way there. There is still a little bit more of the clear glass rod peeking through. So get some of that off. All right, all the clear glass is out of there. So I'm going to continue to warm up this mass, this sort of ball that's on the tip here. This is going to be the butt and the hips. So I want to soften that all up and do a bit of shaping with this area as well. Now you'll notice I'm constantly adjusting the flame. The torch is a really precise tool. I have a lot of options with it. It's got sort of this really tiny needle flame in the center, and then there are several rings of orifices around it. So I can control the size of the flame, the temperature of the flame. I can control the atmosphere, or sort of the mixture of oxygen to gas that's running through the flame. So a lot of control, very precise tool. So setting up that hip area here. And I want to carve a separation in the butt. Okay, and now start to really build on here. I want to get the thighs on, and I'll start to work down the form, finish the feet, get the feet attached to sort of a clear framework, bridge. I'll add a handle to the bottom of that, and then I can start working the upper body. So I did prepare plenty of colored glass for this. This is just another section that I prepped similarly to what you saw for the rest of the form here. So just heating this up, and you'll notice as I work in different regions of the flame also. When I'm trying to really aggressively melt a lot of mass, I'm right in the center of the flame. But I also work off the edges of the flame quite a bit too. When I'm trying to shoot for control over finer details, I'll sort of work off the edges of the flame. I don't always want the glass to be super fluid and dripping. Now, as I go to make attachments, it's really important that both pieces of glass are the right temperature as I touch them together. If either piece isn't quite hot enough when I try to attach them, they may stick together for a little while, but ultimately, as they cool, they'll fall apart. Now, to judge temperature, as you can see, I don't have a thermometer here. I don't have a free hand for a thermometer anyways. So I judge temperature by watching how the glass is glowing and sort of feeling out how it's moving. And that's a bit of a visual feel that you develop through years of working with glass. It's a very important feel to develop. It will tell you when things are ready to be attached. It will tell you how soft the glass is and sort of how much you can get it to move and how much you can affect shape on it. And knowing that the glass is uniformly heated is crucial as well, to know that it will move uniformly. And it's amazing over the years how much more your eyes just continue to tune in to subtleties in how the glass glows. So every once in a while, you're going to notice me sort of swiping off the tip of the rod. Glass has kind of a unique memory to it. It will remember where it's been hotter or cooler as you've been shaping it. And it'll also remember different shapes that it's been through as you've sort of been working it. And the tip of the rod sort of wrap around itself every once in a while. So I want to eliminate that area that I've wrapped around itself. I don't want to leave that on the end of the rod. Otherwise, as I try to pull out a nice uniform appendage, it's going to not pull out quite so uniformly for me. It'll show somewhere in that form that it once was wrapped around itself or once was sort of a different shape. So you'll notice I do clean off the tip of the rod every once in a while and make sure I'm working with glass that has a memory of the sort of shapes that I need to turn it into. So now prepping to make the right thigh here. And one of the tendencies as you add that second thigh is you sort of attach it over to the first one. So as I go to attach this second thigh here, I sort of start it a little further to the outside of the hip than where I intend to have it finish. So I'll get it attached there, and then I can sort of wiggle it, get it closer to the other thigh, and work it over there slowly. So sort of start out on the edge there. As I continue to fuse it in and start to set up to shape it, sort of working it closer and closer to that other thigh. Another big difference working these figures on a larger scale, gravity has a much greater effect on what I'm doing. So I'm sort of going back and forth, letting the glass stretch a little bit, just seeing how much gravity is going to move it. And if it's not quite moving as much as I need, then yeah, I do start pulling a bit.
We've got a question. How does it not burn?
Couldn't quite hear that.
How does it not burn, the glass?
How is it not burning? Glass doesn't combust. Yeah. It is, to my knowledge, just not a combustible material. So as I get it hotter, it gets softer, but it's never going to actually combust and catch fire. Okay, so get our thighs on there. We're going to keep cranking along here. Grab another piece of prep and add on our calves. And I try to set up the tip of the thigh so that when I add the calf, it will also form a knee. So if you can see, the sort of the back side of the thigh tapers from back up to front. The same thing over here. Really sets me up for a nice knee joint. So I originally learned to sculpt figures mostly from a couple of Italian artists, Emilio Santini, who now lives here in the US, and Lucio Bubacco, who lives over in Murano, Venice, Italy. They're probably the two biggest influences in the process that I use to sculpt figures. But I would say in these figures, there's also some influence from Shane Farrow, who's been an important mentor for me through the years. And I sort of draw information from a lot of folks. Alberto Giacometti is certainly an influence in these really long, stretched out figures, the Swiss sculptor.
So in the audience, we've noticed that when you have the glass in the flame, it's no longer blue, it's sort of yellow or bright orange. And that is called soda flare. And so Eric's wearing these purple glasses made of didymium. And what that does is it takes that wavelength of light and filters it out. So it's not harmful to our eyes, but it's very hard to see. So we're not looking through the didymium, we're looking just straight into the flame. And so we're seeing that soda flare. That's the soda ash in the glass burning away. And so it's a soda flare. And the camera here, I believe it has a didymium filter on it. So if you watch the screen, what you're seeing here on the screen is very different from what you're seeing live. We can filter out that soda flare. We don't see it as much. We can see the detail work that Eric sees through his glasses. Because yeah, it does affect what you can't really see what's happening inside the flame. So we need that filter to be able to see into the glass. Yeah, so silica soda ash is that flux material. So that's what's burning away in the flame. So he dialed that torch down to that really concentrated flame. That's going to allow him to kind of soften that seal. Like get rid of any sharp angles.
Yeah, one little subtlety I need to watch out for as I make attachments, I don't want to leave really sharp, acute angles where the different parts come together. As glass is heated, it sort of swells or expands, and as it cools, it'll contract or shrink. So if I leave really sharp, acute angles where different parts come together, as the glass cools and contracts, it's always possible that it may contract so much in those areas that it pulls apart and it cracks. So that's why I went in with that little needle flame right in behind the knee, make sure that connection was rounded in. It's okay to have an acute angle, it just can't be really sharp. Someone on the internet was wondering what shade didymiums I'm wearing. These are just straight didymium. No shade, no welding shade. So again, really using gravity here. So grazing heat where I need to keep things moving a little bit more. Another interesting thing with this white, it seems to hold the heat for a little longer than some other colors do. So it stays soft a little bit longer than a lot of other colored glasses of this sort might. So the glass that I'm using is what's known as borosilicate. And there are a whole lot of different recipes for glass out there in the world. There's actually tens of thousands of recipes for glass out there. A lot of folks, when they come here to the Glass Museum or when they think about glass, maybe out there on the internet, they just think glass is glass. It's all made from the same materials. It all has the same characteristics. But there are, as I mentioned, tens of thousands of different recipes out there. And by changing recipes, by changing some of the ingredients, just like a batch of cookies, you change some ingredients and you get some really different results. So this particular glass was originally developed to be used for, well, initially for lenses for telescopes. And the big concern, I mentioned how glass expands and contracts with temperature change. Well, the big concern with lenses for telescopes is as the seasons would change, colder weather, your lens is expanding or contracting, so your optics are changing, and your your tool simply isn't going to be as precise if it's expanding and contracting. Your optical abilities from that telescope won't be as accurate. So in the late 1800s, some German scientists really dug in trying to figure out a better glass to use for lenses that would not expand and contract so much. And they found that by adding some boron oxide, they could in fact make a glass that expanded and contracted a lot less. And what that also led to was realizing that a glass like that would tolerate temperature change really well. Most glasses, if you heat or cool them too quickly or just unevenly, they tend to crack because they expand and contract so unevenly. But when you add a little boron oxide to it, it expands and contracts less, and it's less likely to crack just due to temperature change. We call that thermal shock. And so this glass then became sort of the industry standard for scientific labware. So for apparatus for chemistry labs, things like that. And over the last 100 years, or 100 plus years, it's been a really crucial component to a whole lot of scientific research and discovery. But it's also a really handy material artistically, since I don't have to worry quite so much about the glass cracking just because I'm changing temperatures quickly. It frees me up to focus a little more on some of the other details of what I'm working on. It makes it easier to talk while I'm working too, so pretty handy stuff. And because the composition of the base glass is different, the colorants that are used for this type of glass are often different than other formulas for glass. So getting the feet added onto the figure here, in case you guys haven't noticed. So I start by adding the heel first, and then we'll add the rest of the foot on here. Trim that flame down a little bit. And I did opt to throw a glove on. My hand was sweating a bit, so just easier to keep it all under control if I have that glove on there. So now we'll get the rest of the foot added on. And these are pretty delicate attachments here as I'm adding the rest of the foot. That ankle's pretty thin, and I'm adding a big glob of really hot glass onto it. So I've got to be cautious, get my temperatures just right so I don't get the ankle moving too much. But I do make a good fused attachment. Just flattening that out a little bit. We'll give this a quick reheat. I'll sort of squeeze in a little more of the toe area, and we'll stretch this, try to arch the foot a little bit. It's always this back and forth. Add a detail, then I've got to warm more material to add that next detail. So for folks curious, both here and on the internet, we are trying something a little bit new with a live stream where this piece, if everything comes out okay, will be available for sale through our retail shops here. So if you want to catch news with that. I believe if everything works out fine, and there's always a chance it doesn't, but if everything works out fine, you can check our shop's social media feeds, the Corning Museum shops, on both Facebook and Instagram. And ultimately, on Friday, again, if everything goes smoothly, will be available for sale on our shops.cmog.org site. So something to keep in mind if you find you like this.
Yeah, and every Wednesday this fall, through the winter, and I believe even through the spring, we're going to be doing these live streams Wednesday morning. And we're going to go I think we're going to start going back and forth from an artist's demonstration and a you design it, we make it. So for those of you who are watching at home, or you might have here at the museum, in the past we've done a program called You Design It, We Make It. And it's something that you can draw a picture and submit an idea. And the glass artist that will be making the piece will pick one of those designs and make it out of glass. And so it's something we didn't do this summer because of the pandemic, but we're excited to start a new digital version of this YDI. And so share that with your friends. You can keep an eye out for the digital submission form. And we're excited about that.
So just going in, really making sure things are properly fused in the feet and the ankles. My next step will be attaching a bridge of clear glass from one foot to the other. I'll sort of build a little bit of a sculptural accessory around that as well. But ultimately, this is all going to hold the entire figure, those ankles and those feet. So I've got to make sure everything's sealed properly there so we don't have any fun surprises later on.
Yes, we've got another question about cooling. So this piece, once he's finished, is going to have to cool slowly over a period of time. And what will your cooling time be for this figure?
About, I guess it'll work out to be about 6 hours probably that it takes this oven to come down.
Yep. The larger, the thicker the work, the longer that annealing cycle becomes. Yeah. This oven right here, this is called the annealing oven. He's also warming some glass in this oven, so he can keep the glass warm in the oven as well. But once he's finished, he'll make sure everything's in and closed up, and then it will come down on its annealing cycle. Yep.
All right, so I'm going to build that bridge from one foot to the other.
So Eric, I have a question. I'm not so familiar with the borosilicate process. How long can you, once you're finished with the figure, how long can it stay out in the room temperature air before it has to go into that annealer?
For this figure, if I really get everything attached well, I could just leave it out on the table as I finish, actually, and it probably would be just fine. I'm not going to take that chance with this particular one, but yeah, typically they're just fine. Now, so there will be a point where I'm going to leave this out on the table and really try to allow it to cool. Or actually, no, sorry. No, I will not be doing that because I'm going to attach it to its base. So yeah, I will keep this hot in the oven as I get the base all set. And then my biggest concern once the base is attached is that last attachment between the base and the figure. There's going to be a big, thick solid knop as sort of the centerpiece to the base. So I will have to put that straight into an oven. But if I'm just making the figure and it's on the bases like what you see in front of me here, those I just leave right out on the table and they're fine. And then I'll anneal them from cold. I'll bring the oven up from cold and up to 1050 Fahrenheit as fast as the oven will go up. And for a figure this thickness, I'll generally soak it for about 2 hours and then shut the oven off and let it come down as fast as the oven is able to cool down. It's another nice thing about borosilicate. It's much friendlier in the annealing end of things as well, since it tolerates temperature change so well. Annealing schedules tend to be shorter than many other glasses.
So we're using this term borosilicate glass, and most of you might not be familiar with borosilicate glass. I know there's probably a lot of artists watching at home, and they're pretty familiar, but how many of you are familiar with Pyrex? Yeah, that's a brand name of a borosilicate glass. So we're all we've all probably held borosilicate glass in our hands. We just didn't know the proper name for it. That's why you can pour boiling water into Pyrex and it doesn't explode. If you took regular soda lime glass and you poured boiling water into it, it would crack and break immediately.
All right, so I've sort of built that bridge from one foot to the other here. Really getting that all fused in. I like to sort of incorporate that bridge into the rest of the sculpture a bit more by sort of building an armature out of it, as you can see from the figures on the table here.
I love watching that gooey glass stretch. Isn't that cool? But it goes, see how it goes from that really gooey, stretchy material to a material that's, it's not moving much anymore? That's his working time. It's probably about, less than 5 seconds. It cools so quickly. He was able to get that really beautiful fluid form, and then almost instantly it kind of cooled right off. And you can really see Eric's years of experience. He said he's been working with glass for almost 25 years now. And the fact that that is so fluid and looks so easy just is a testament to his skill and the years of experience that he has working with this material.
I really love to play off the way glass sort of flows and freezes. I've enjoyed using that in a lot of my work, and this sort of style of armature kind of plays off of that as well. And also these figures kind of play off of how glass will stretch and then sort of fuse into place. And sometimes that does influence my work as well, just the sort of materiality of glass. It's a special material.
I love how we're live streaming this, so people are watching from home on the internet. And they're watching it in live time, all because of glass. The optical fibers that allows that information to travel through those thin strands of glass. So we're all connected by glass, especially now. You didn't have to download the live stream. It's not buffering. I know Eric talked about this a little bit earlier, but we can kind of see the heat in the glass. See that nice shadow? When we get the dark view, you can see the heat. When it comes out of the flame, you'll be able to see where it's glowing and where it's not glowing. The areas that are glowing brightest are where the glass is the hottest and softest. And you can see he can pull it to a really fine thread, and eventually it just breaks free. You can pull glass almost as fine as a human hair if you pull it hot enough and fast enough.
All right, so I'm feeling pretty good about that armature. Now, I'm just going to connect this rod right to the center of it. This is going to become my new handle to support the pieces I work on the upper body.
So if you're hooked, every Wednesday we'll be live streaming down here in the Amphitheater with different artists, different glass artists. So he comes out of the heat and lets it kind of cool and settle up. You can use gravity. You can even use gravity to let that rod kind of pull everything straight. I've noticed when Eric works, he kind of goes vertical if he wants things to kind of fall in line. So gravity is one of our favorite tools as glass makers.
All right, so just waiting for the glow to sort of fade from down there. But I'm going to adjust my flame here, actually really reducing the temperature of the flame. I've taken a lot of the oxygen out of it, which is our accelerant. The top part here has been cooling for about a half hour. So I want to ease the heat back in there. I don't want to shock this by heating it too quickly. That would cause some cracking. So going with a much cooler, gentler flame, trying to ease heat back into this area. I can see a little bit of a glow in the glass now, so I know it's warm enough. I can add the oxygen back in and safely go back to this 4,000 degree flame here. So the flame I was just using was probably closer to about 1,500 Fahrenheit. But now we're back up around 4,000. I'm just going to take this handle off of here for now. I'm going to set the rest of the figure in my annealing oven over to my left side here. I want to let the rest of the upper body re-warm in there. And I'll work on an element of the base. I'm going to do a bit of a variation on a tripod. The tripods that I have on the figures that are on the table here are something I had been using for a while for much smaller figures, and I'm finding that these larger scale ones, they really need a more robust base, so I've been working on that as well. So I'm going to go ahead, we'll set her in the oven for now, keep her warm, and really re-warm that upper body a bit more. And the oven is holding at 1,060 Fahrenheit, so that's hot enough to keep it safe and get it warm enough that I can take it directly into the 4,000 degree flame, but not so hot that it's going to melt and change shape in there. So I'm going to show you, I've already prepared a few legs for the tripod that I'll be using for the finished piece, but I do want to show you how those parts can be made. So what I do basically is just cut 3 sections of rod that are the same length. I just cut them when they're cold, score the glass, and I can snap it. And the material I start with here are rods that are anywhere from 4 to 5 feet long. They're all sold in very specific diameters. So this is 12.7 millimeter rod here. Well, it's pretty convenient to know that you're starting with the exact same material when you've got things that need to match, obviously. So let's sort of round out that end a little bit.
So for those of you who are just joining us, this is Eric Goldschmidt. He's a glass artist who's been working with glass for about 25 years. And he's making one of his figures for us today. We have a few examples up on his table that you can see. He's finished the sort of lower half of the body, and now he's working on the base.
So I just attach some of the thicker rod to a narrower handle. Makes it easier to handle, go figure. And I'm going to round off the other end of the rod. When you heat into a broken edge of glass with a torch, it tends to boil and bubble. What we typically think of as a broken edge, we think it's just that one sharp edge, but there are actually a whole bunch of little micro fractures that run along that. So if you just heat into that micro fractured edge, you start to seal in some of those micro fractures and they bubble. They turn into bubbles. You're actually sealing an air pocket. So that's why I make sure to strip off the ends of these rods. So sort of heat up the end. I can see it bubbling in there, and just sort of pinch off that bubbled area. Melt that apart. And one nice thing about glass, if you heat it uniformly all the way around, it wants to pull itself into a rounded form, or really into a sphere. So you can see, just by sort of heating up the end, even though it was a different shape before I started heating that, it just rounds right out. Very convenient, natural property of glass. So from there, I've got these pieces down here that are all bent and ready to be legs of a tripod. So the next step is to do the bend. So I want to soak heat along the length of this. And I'm going to use my tweezers just to sort of support that far end of the rod. So I don't want that end soft enough that the tweezers are going to leave an impression. But I want the middle of this soft enough that it will bend. So I'm really trying to soak heat along the length. Soften that up. I'm watching the very subtle glow of the glass at this point. And that's starting to move a little. And I don't want to get this too fluid or I'll lose control. So just sort of orangey is enough. If I need it to move a little more, we'll give it just a little extra heat there. Take it down to the bench, and if I really need the curves to match, I can just sort of go one right on top of the other here. This is a little bit off. And also, if I have a piece all drawn out, I could have my drawing on the table and just sort of bend to that drawing as well. So I gives you an idea of how those elements come about. And then the next step with the base, I've got a central, what we call a knop, already formed in here of that same white that I'm using for the figure, so it works as a nice complement to the figure. Now I want to create a tripod, so the three pieces need to be evenly spaced. So I want to put in some little guidelines so that I do in fact get these evenly spaced. So I'm just putting a little indentation with my knife here. Okay, those look pretty evenly spaced. Attached on here, and this is another really nice thing about this particular borosilicate glass. I can hold part of this in my bare hand and heat the other end so much that it gets molten enough that I can make this hot fused attachment here. This would be really hard to do with just about any other composition of glass. And as I mentioned earlier, I want to make sure I'm not leaving really sharp, acute angles where the different parts come together. So we're going to get in there with this into some of these angles with this little hand torch here. Make sure everything is properly fused. Wait for one side to firm up a little bit before I soften up the other side. Really looking to see if I've left any sort of undercuts or sharp, acute angle spots here. And just by putting this little needle flame in the gaps, as the glass melts and flows a little bit, it rounds out those angles and eliminates the problem. And once you flame work for long enough, you start to think that you can eliminate all your problems with a torch. Not really the case. Alrighty, so that looks pretty good. Just leave that going. I'll probably need to come right back to it. We'll add our next section here, our next leg. So I created those little indentations with that knife at an angle such that I can see them as I'm making the attachment. So again, just getting into these angles, rounding everything in. You cannot cheat the glass. You can't cheat physics. This last leg on here. Looks to be standing fairly straight. Clean up the angles on this. These little mini torches are great. They're actually first designed and advertised as jewelers' torches, and us flameworkers started using these things a number of years ago, and really can make a big difference, especially for tasks like this, where you've got to really just clean up a tiny little angle or a tiny little detail. Use the perfect heat.
Is it a much smaller flame than your torch can get?
The other torch can get a flame that's pretty similar to this, but I can't hold it in my hand.
Right.
So I'm really limited. Sometimes you bump into the table or things you've got on the table, and you've got to hold things at different angles where maybe gravity's not going to work in your favor.
Right, so you wouldn't be able to go straight up and down with that tabletop torch because you don't have enough room. Gotcha.
They're just being able to hold the torch in your hand can make a big difference. That's another thing that this glass, this borosilicate glass, has led to as well. Since the whole thing doesn't need to be the same temperature the whole time, all of a sudden you can use a hand torch and just sort of spot heat different areas, and works pretty well for this purpose. All right, so we look pretty good there. So I'm going to keep the base warm in the oven as well. We'll pull the figure back out. Actually, I might as well put my glove back on.
Any questions from the audience? No? In Fahrenheit. The melting temperature for glass is different for every type of glass. So for the melting, what's the melting point for this borosilicate glass, Eric?
Okay, so I've soaked some more heat back into the figure here. I want to play with her posture a little bit and make her a bit more dramatic of a posture.
Eric, we have a question. What is the melting point for the borosilicate glass?
1448 Fahrenheit is where boros starts to move, starts to soften. As I'm working, it's anywhere between there and maybe 2700 or so when I'm getting it really fluid. That's in Fahrenheit. I speak Fahrenheit for the most part. So just sort of give her a little bend, or a lot of bend, and a bit of twist. And now we'll start to dive in on the details for the upper body here. So just driving some heat into this rod here, this color prep. I want to elongate it a little bit. My next steps here are to add a little bit of a neck detail, shoulders, biceps, head, and then forearms. And then we'll get the hands done and get it all attached to the base. So I've let the end elongate and thin out a little bit, just using gravity. It's my third hand. So we'll add a little bit of neck material here.
Eric, would you ever make the whole arm and the hand and then attach it to the body?
There are times that I do. There are a lot of folks who do go about sculpting a figure that way. For me personally, I prefer to make all the details on the same mass because I have an easier time with the proportions. The hands for this figure I will make separately. Sometimes I'll make a head separately. And the times that I will make all the parts separately are really only times when I'm adding a ton of detail, when I'm really either adding clothing or like really deep muscle detail. But aside from that, I really have such an easier time proportionally making it all while it's all in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's just me personally. There are folks who work in all sorts of different orders and different methods. So setting up shoulders. And of course, as I set up the shoulders, I'm thinking about what I want the arms doing as well. I've got to position the shoulders so that they relate to the arm movement. If I'm reaching down, my shoulders sort of rolled down. If I'm reaching up, my shoulders rolled up or sort of pushed up. So I'm considering that as I'm going here as well. So that left shoulder is going to sort of be reaching down. The right should be reaching up. Thanks. All right. Shoulders are on. Now we're going to work on the breasts. Excuse me. As I add the breasts here, I'm thinking about my view. I'm going to add her right breast first, which as I face the figure is on my left. Then as I make the second one, I can see the first one, and I can measure them out and get them to match better. So oftentimes you really have to sort of adjust your order of process for what you can see and how you can best get into the details and view the details to get them to match.
So because as glassmakers we use gravity to shape the glass a lot, you have to kind of elaborate on what he was saying. You have to hold the glass in certain ways. So being able to see the glass because you're using gravity.
That's exactly what I'm up to there. Just really trying to use the flame to kind of almost sort of carve into the glass, getting certain parts moving, and then counting on gravity to get it to drip to where I really want it. Glass is such a unique material that way. It really has a long transition between being completely rigid and then being really fluid and flowing. And that's one of the really unique things about this material. Most other materials that you might melt for artistic work are going to go from completely rigid to absolutely fluid and liquid, and there isn't a transition. But with glass, you sort of starts out really rigid, and it gets a little bit plasticky. It's soft enough that you can kind of push it around. And then it gets a little more like taffy, where it stretches a bit more easily. And well, eventually you get to this point where it's almost as fluid as honey, and it's really sort of dripping and flowing. But that long transition really allows us to do a lot of shaping freehand without having to use molds to really force the glass into shapes or catch it when it's really fluid so it fills out a mold into a certain shape. sort of always working amongst those ranges of viscosity. It's one of the harder things to get used to with this stuff, I think. All right. Breasts look good. Now we'll get some biceps on here. So I mentioned my order of process. I'm going to add the biceps, then the head, then the forearms. And I'm doing that because right now that shoulder and chest area is nice and warm. And I want to finish all the details around that chest area, the chest and neck and shoulder area, while it's still hot. If it cools down too much there and I bring it back to this flame, very likely to crack the piece. There's just so many different attachments in that area. It's pretty thick, and it would definitely be prone to some cracking if it got too cold. The tip of the biceps are easier to heat back into. There's going to be less strain. There aren't multiple things attached in that spot. It'll be narrower. And it all relates to what I was talking about earlier, how glass expands with heat, contracts with cooling.
As this figure becomes larger and larger, taller, and it's taking up more space, you can see how Eric really kind of has to move a little differently to not bump or tap anything. He heats like both sides of the bicep. See, instead of like turning in the flame like he was doing when he had just the mass of glass, he could keep it turning evenly. But when you've got this figure like this, it would be very difficult to keep it turning. It's kind of heat both sides so it pulls out, stretches even.
So with the biceps, I'm also setting up for an elbow. I have sort of the top of the bicep, it kind of rolls from, bicep sort of underneath in this position, tricep on top, but it curves here, so when I attach the forearm, it sets me up for an elbow in there as well. So I was trying to accomplish as much as I can with my setup and really try to keep my life as simple as possible. The more details I can create in one attachment, one motion, the easier I can make my process. And I really sort of enjoy using minimal tooling also. I really love to work with the flow of the material and work with heat and gravity and the properties of the glass as much as possible and not have to beat it into shape all the time. It's just not necessary. And I like to have that sort of projected in my work as well, that it sort of comes from the flow of the material and sort of suggests the flow of the material. Alrighty, so we get our other bicep. just sort of looking back and forth at the previous bicep to this one, trying to get them to match in diameter and length. And when you're trying to make appendages match, it's always best, if you're going to be off, to be a little bit off on the second one and to be off having it larger rather than smaller. It's always easier to remove a little bit of material from an area that's already hot than it is either to add to that or to try to remove material from something that's cooled down already. A little bit thick still. Yep.
How do you avoid dehydration or burning out the flux in your supply rod when it's almost completely?
How do I avoid burning out the fluxes or affecting otherwise ruining the color of my rod that I'm adding material from, even though I am keeping it hot the whole time? It's a good question. I guess I work quickly enough that it's not quite an issue. And the colors that I'm using are just not that likely to do that, I guess. It's not really something I had even considered. Okay, so feeling all right with the biceps. We're going to add the head on here next. So just trying to prepare the mass I want to add on here for the head. Just using this little bracket to create a little constriction in there. So as I add the head material, I've got it pretty well measured out. One of the things to watch out for as you attach that mass for the head is to not push it together too hard. Otherwise, what could be a really elegant female form starts to look like a linebacker because she has no neck. No offense to linebackers. again, really using gravity, using the properties of the material to round it up, let it hang and stretch. I want to add some more material to the head. I'm going to add a bit for sort of the jawline.
Yeah, come on in. We've got glass artist Eric Goldschmidt making one of his figures. We're also live streaming, so we've got some viewers watching from home. This is a new segment we're going to do almost every Wednesday. I think it's going to flip-flop from a you design it, we make it to this live stream, bring the heat. So this is going to be our new artist series, Bring the Heat. This is our very first one. You can watch from home from our YouTube channel, Corning Museum of Glass.
Okay, so we've got the head shaped up. I'm going to add a little bit of a nose detail. And for the nose, I actually don't even add any material. I just sort of pull it out of what's already there for the front of the face here. Another little bit of prepped color in here. Add some hair. And actually, I'm going to adjust the position of her head before I add the hair.
So Eric did quite a lot of prep work before he started today. You can see the rods kind of sticking out of the oven here. He's using clear glass, and then it has like a thin skin of a white glass on top of it. And so he prepared, like you see the one in his left or his right hand. He's prepared that beforehand because that process of applying the thin layer of white color takes a few minutes, a good chunk of time, and so it's nice to have that already prepped and ready to go. And then he keeps them in this oven, which just keeps them nice and warm. The oven's around 1,000 degrees. And so he's not going from a cold piece of glass. It doesn't take as long to get it hot and gooey and molten. So he has been working for the past hour and a half on this piece. So this is a very time-consuming piece of glass to make. So he's going to go straight through. I think he's got half an hour or 20 minutes left to add some arms and hands.
All right, we'll add some hair on here next.
So Eric's been working with glass for about 25 years. So he makes this whole process look very easy. So yeah, so what you're seeing is not an easy, he makes it look so easy, like, oh, it's like your glass just stretches and pulls. But what you're seeing is years of experience. It's kind of like playing an instrument or a sport. The more you practice, the easier it becomes. Or the more things you're able to do, the more things you're able to learn. Once you have those foundation skills, you can just keep building on those skills. And the more difficult work you can make, the larger scale work you make. I don't think Eric probably started at this scale years ago. I think over the years, he was able to increase the size of the pieces he made. And so this scale for this process is very large. Using heat and gravity. It's almost like this is a very physical process. You can see he's kind of having to bend and kind of contort in this flame to get the certain angles. Glassmaking is not really a friendly process to the body.
Add another strand of hair, or whatever we want to call them.
Kind of gathers the glass. He's kind of heating it so it's a ball and a really gooey mass of glass, and then he'll kind of stick it on and stretch it to that hair shape. But right now he's just kind of gathering that ball and getting that gooey hot glass. And with that 25 years of experience, he knows just how much heat he needs to get that hair to pull out all the way. And he knows he's got to get it so hot even to the core, because if the core is cold, it'll affect how it pulls and stretches. You know, it's so gooey and it stretches, but it's going to go from that gooey, stretchy material. You can already see how some of it's cooling. The parts that aren't in the flame are already starting to settle up, and it's only gooey right in the flame. And you can pull it to that fine thread to break it free. He doesn't use shears or anything to cut it. He pulls it thin and runs that through the flame, and it breaks free. See, that hair that was just moving, just gooey and hot, is now kind of frozen. Still very hot, but it's not going to move much unless he reheats it. And then once he gets all these fine details, he has to keep those out of the flame. because if he holds it at an angle where those get hot, they'll start to soften and they'll lose that shape. So to keep the shape of this figure, he's got to be really careful about what parts he heats in the flame.
Yeah, and that's really one of the great things about flame working too, where it really lends itself well to fine detail work. But since I can focus heat just where I want things to move, but keep the heat away from other areas that I don't want moving, this process really lends itself to finer detail work than many other processes in glassworking.
If you've ever seen furnace work or glass making out of a furnace, which is the shop behind him, and that oven over there is a reheating oven. If he were to make a figure like this from furnace work, he's got all these, like the thin waist and the thin legs. When he went into the reheating oven, those areas would soften. And so because he's using this borosilicate glass, he can keep those areas cool and not heat the whole thing while he's working. But he does have to work in a different way where he kind of builds from one side to the other. See how it just drips like honey?
All right, so we're going to get our forearms on here.
Are your arms getting tired, Eric?
No, my arms are doing okay.
Shoulders?
You start to develop different muscle sets when you do something for 24 years. Yeah, it's interesting. It's very different muscles than what you use when you work glass at the furnace.
I like that view, that darker sort of camera view where you can see the color in the glass. It's very difficult to blow glass or work with glass outside because it's so bright outside that it's hard to see those temperatures. This is tricky, stretching that arm out. So he's got to stretch it so it starts to cool and keep its shape while heating that one area that's the gather to pull from. And because sometimes he twists up the end, it gathers up on the end like that, he just dripped a little bit of that off to make sure it's nice and clean when he goes to use it again.
Sometimes folks like to ask, if you make a mistake or do something you don't like, can you fix it? Well, depends on what that thing is, but yeah, sometimes we don't like the way they turn out. And certain things can be adjusted. Try that forearm again. I didn't like the way it was stretching. So another thing I'm really watching out for at this point, the chest is pretty cool. And actually really the whole figure, aside from the hair, is pretty close to room temperature. So if I happen to hit the flame on any of that, it is likely to crack. So I've got to be pretty cautious here. That's why I'm getting into some pretty funky body positions, just trying to get the heat where I need it, but keep that flame away from anything it's going to damage.
Yeah, that's the worst sound when you've been working on something for hours, is that little tink. You hear it kind of tink. The worst sound. Now you can see he's got a glove on one hand and bare hands on the other hand. And he slipped the glove on earlier because he said his hand was starting to sweat and it was hard to, he's holding most of the weight with that left hand, the hand that the glove's on. And when your hand starts to sweat, it's really hard to like hold on to things and keep it hot. But the rods don't get hot.
That's more like it.
They get hot really close to where he's heating it, but that flame is so direct that the heat is kind of forced in one little area. So I'm sure he feels a little heat from the flame, but it's not, he can get pretty close to it. And he's got this really neat little small torch that he can get in and heat certain angles. Just clean off the end, let it drip off. That's why it's always important to work on a non-flammable surface. He's got a fireboard on the table as well as some sheets of graphite. And he can use those sheets of graphite as a shaping tool as well, like a marver. So he goes in the heat to get that heat, to get the glass moving, and then comes out of the heat so it starts to cool as it stretches. And you only heat the areas you want it to move and pull and stretch. Now watch how that color changes when he's out of the flame. It was glowing like sort of an orangey color, but it's already starting to look white, like the true color that it is, and that's just the heat. So when it starts to look white, we know it's starting to become cooler, and those areas that are glowing, like just the tip of the arm now is glowing. We know that arm is still very hot because he just added it. But at around 1,000 degrees or so, that glass is hot, but it won't move. It's very hard and rigid. Because he's added the arm on this face, he can get in there with that really small torch and just kind of smooth away the connection. Make sure there's not any really sharp angles. What do you guys think so far? Yeah, beautiful.
There you go. So we're going to set her there for the moment. I've got one hand made already. I'm going to get the other hand made, and then we'll attach her to the base. So for the hands, I've already prepared some smaller bits of glass. Trying to remember where I picked up this concept from. I want to say it was Mylan Townsend, actually, to get your hands to work out more proportionately. I sort of make a faux arm and then create the hand on that faux arm and then transfer it to the actual arm. So that way I don't have to hold the whole figure as I'm doing this finer detail work. but I still have a good sense for what the proportion needs to be, what the scale needs to be.
So this is a new live stream series we're called Bring the Heat. So Eric is the first Bring the Heat glass artist.
Can I add that to the resume? I brought the heat first.
Brought the heat on September 16th. I don't know what, I don't actually know what the date is today. I'm just, 2020, Eric brought the heat. So we're going to be doing these live stream events Wednesdays here in the morning, 10 to 12. And this week we have Eric Goldschmidt. He's a glass artist and he's doing a demonstration of his work. Next week we're going to be doing a You Design It, We Make It. And that's a program that we've done here at the museum for many years. We usually do it in the summer, and visitors can come in and draw a design of something they want made out of glass. And the guest artist, or not the guest artist, the artist would make, the glass artist would make that, they'd go through all of the designs and they'd pick one that they thought they could make. We do have a specific time that we have to kind of fill. And there are shapes that do lend themselves better to glass. If it was a very geometric shape, that might be a hard one to do in a certain period of time. And so they'll pick one that they think they're able to make, or one that they really like. You can submit designs online at some point, so keep an eye out for that on our website. So you can digitally submit. We're not doing them here at the museum anymore due to the pandemic, and we don't, it'd be hard to sanitize all the markers and things, and so we're doing sort of a digital version of that, which we're pretty excited about, and it's the first time we're doing it, and our first one is next Wednesday.
So as I make the hand here, for a piece this scale, I'll add all the fingers separately. If it were a really small scale figure, I tend to make more of a mitten. What do we got there? That's a left or right hand.
And I believe at some point this demonstration will be on our YouTube channel, so you could go back and revisit Eric's live stream for the Bring the Heat, which is pretty cool. So if you wanted to share with your friends, you say, I saw Eric Goldschmidt make this amazing figure. Eventually this will be put into our collection of glassmaking videos and live streams.
And you can even buy the piece if it comes out of the oven properly, too.
That's right. So if you fall in love with this piece, if everything comes out of the oven in one piece, you'll have the opportunity to go home with this beautiful piece. You might have noticed he's switched to some smaller rods of glass. When he was building up the body and the legs and the arms, he was working with a larger mass of glass. And for this fine detail work, he's dialed down that flame to a very small flame. He's using smaller rods of glass.
So I get all the fingers on there, get the thumb on there, and then sort of spot heat and adjust the finger positions. Okay. So I typically stand up for some of the bigger, bulkier parts of the process, or when I'm working on bigger aspects of the piece. But then when I'm working on something as delicate and precise as these hands, it's really nice to sit down for that. Okay. Throw the glove back on here.
So he's got that on a really delicate connection, or a punty, right to the fingertip. He's got to heat the connection to the arm and the hand, getting them both moving, both hot, so it's a nice seal and the glass flows together. And then brings it out of the flame so it cools, keeps its shape. Then he'll remove that handle. Well, I like that he had the hands on two sides of the handle. Wow, what do you think?
Get those hands on there. Next step is attaching to the base. It's actually convenient at this point that her body is a bit cooler, or a lot cooler for that matter. I'm going to go ahead and remove this rod. So these figures need a base to stand on. So he's pre-made the base. It's in this oven. And so once he gets that all cleaned up, he's going to pull the base out of the oven and then attach the two together. Eric's been working on this beautiful figure for about 2 hours now. So to make something like this, 2 hours kind of seems like a short period of time to make something like this. And it is, but Eric makes it he's able to make this figure in 2 hours with 25 years of experience. You noticed earlier he was using rods of glass and he could just kind of twirl them in his hand. Now that he's got this figure, he's kind of have to flip back and forth to heat all the sides to keep it round. If he were to heat just one side, the one side would get hot, but also because he wasn't turning, the glass would start to drip towards the floor. So he's got to keep it centered by flipping it so that it doesn't drip right off. And when you heat the glass, it tends to want to round out. So it naturally is taking that round form, but he's got to keep it turning to keep the round bit on the end even. And then even outside the flame, he can control how the glass moves. If he holds it up, it'll settle back. If he holds it down, it'll start to stretch out. So if he wants a sort of squat shape. Can you grab the oven door for me, Catherine?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Are all these okay, or do you have to hold any of them down? Is everything in here okay, or does it have to be held down?
Everything's fine in there. Just got to grab the base. Go for it. There we go. Thanks.
So everything in this oven is kept right around 1,000 degrees. Looks like he's going to attach a punty to the base. Punty is a transfer iron or a temporary handle. So that'll allow him to remove it from that rod that it's on now. The one that it's on now is a very permanent connection. And so it's going to take some heat to kind of pull that off. The punty is a very weak, temporary connection.
Catherine, you mind staying over here?
Yeah.
So I'm going to pick up the figure in a second. You could get that glove out of the way. That would
If
be
I could get
great.
what?
Get the glove out of the way once I pick up the figure.
Okay. You're going to use the marver?
Yeah. So watch yourself there. Okay, why don't you grab that? Thanks.
So when he sticks two bits of glass together, he wants them both to be at the kind of the same temperature so the glass flows together and it creates a really good seal. So he waits for them both to have this really nice glow inside the flame. And once they both have that bright glow, they sticks it right together. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with this process, this is a very large scale for this process. If you've seen flame working before, you might have seen little kind of figurines being made that aren't, 3 or 4 inches. This is, Eric really pushes the limits with this process of material and has made some very large work. Amanda's also taking some still shots, which will be probably posted to our social media or our websites. A light tap and that punty pops right off. What do you guys think? Our beautiful figure. Wow.
I just want to clean up the connection. It's a little bit wrinkly on the surface here, which happens. Ooh, right as we're running out of oxygen. Perfect.
So it looks like now he can kind of heat that connection and adjust the angle of the piece, or just remove those sharp angles from attaching those two pieces of glass together.
All right, so I'm gonna have to put this into the oven pretty quickly here because it's so thick with all those parts coming together. Is Amanda around here?
Amanda?
Or did she get it? One last shot and it has to go in the box.
All right, what do you guys think?
I'll give you guys one last look there.
Beautiful.
Alrighty. Excellent. We'll go into the oven. And hope she fits.
Man,
Ooh, not quite. You know what? We're going to cheat. Get the base in there. No, that's not going to work either.
You want to put it in one of
Gonna
ours?
bend her
Is it
hand
cold?
down.
Too cold?
No, I think we're close enough that if I just bend her hand. Let's see how that does. Nope, not going to happen. All right. Actually, that's not a bad idea. That would be helpful. Is it up and ready?
So we're going to switch to a larger annealer. This one's a little cooler than the flame working annealer.
All right, that'll be safe.
Eric Goldschmidt, everyone.
Thank you.